I've clicked it already.
Okay.
Okay, go live.
All right, here we go. Hello, everyone. This is Karen Jackson and John Okiwoli, and we are happy to welcome you to keynote number 4. We've had to make a substitution, but we have chosen Dr. Lena Bakshi, and she was such an inspiring speaker talking about STEM for real, and her influence and her belief in STEM and uh, breaking down barriers and just so many wonderful things that we're going to bring it on again so that you have a wonderful experience. So without further ado, we're going to click the play button and we're going to start the video as a replay of
It's an
Dr.
honor to
Lena
be here, especially on
Bakshi.
this global stage and being able to connect with so many educators all over the world to talk about STEM. And in particular, I am very passionate about having STEM be an access point and an opportunity for every single individual, no
We're going to
matter
have to
race,
work on
creed,
the
socioeconomic status.
resolution.
Having
Let me
STEM
pause
Yeah,
be a
that
yeah.
and do that over again. So
We have to refresh.
apologies for that. Yeah. So apologies for that. I'll be eating on it shortly.
Okay. Okay, now we're going to play a game called What's on Karen's Desk. This.
We
There we
are
go.
here to have.
Ah, we're back.
I'm going to go ahead and share my
Yeah,
screen. Are you ready for that?
I think this better.
Right. We're ready.
Okay,
Okay,
so I'm
Dr.
going to go ahead
Bakshi.
and do that.
Here we go.
And let's see.
Thank
So
you,
we're
everyone.
here.
Enjoy. I'm going to
Awesome.
sit back and watch
Like
this.
the technology gods are doing great. So I should be able to see my screen. And
Yes, we can. It's on live
perfect.
right
Awesome. All right. Sounds good. Well, I just sort of picked up the hashtag TeachC24 and the motto for the Teachathon, and that is to continually build capacity and creativity of educators via effective technology adoption and integration for the learning process. And I could not stand by that theme and that mission more so. So, with that said, and with this platform, let's go ahead and dive right into what STEM is and how we can make it for real and for all. So, a little bit about me. I'm a math, science, and health teacher. That's what I taught. Mostly looking at the integration of how all of these domains can combine. I also served as an instructional coach, working with instructional leaders all across the state, and primarily in California. And then I went on to work at the county office, working at the county and state levels in terms of implementing science education and looking at science reform. I researched STEM education, particularly in lower income schools, and how these schools and districts are making STEM for real for all of despite any sort of economic barriers, how they're making it, a reality. And in doing so, we were inspired to say, well, wow, how can we create a nonprofit that can actually make STEM for real? And that's what we've sort of taken on as our charge. And carry that work even in my work as a UC Berkeley lecturer, working in the field of teacher education and preparing future science teachers and future teachers in our field. So just a little bit about me, but I'm sure you didn't come here to learn about a bio on me. So I want to tell you more about our story and what we want to accomplish in terms of our nonprofit with STEM for real. So we actually started out with a story, and that was to amplify the stories of people of color in STEM. We really want to normalize this idea of Black men in STEM or brown girls in STEM, and really just get to an idea where it's not just this stereotype, but it's a way of life, and how we can amplify those stories so that when young people of color are reading about about all of these different diverse voices, they can look up and say, wow, they look like me. I can be in STEM too. And that's really something, is like, we really have to get to a place where our young people are seeing themselves in the field. That's truly the first step. And they have that identity within that field. So we know that we started with this story, and yet we wanted to scale our work so that we can take on educational leadership and professional learning in a way that goes beyond a children's book per se, and we're really able to look at professional learning on a global scale. So, as John mentioned, this is a time of a global pandemic and shifting our entire profession behind a computer. And there is a lot of trauma that is associated with that. So it's up to us to truly build a culture of empathy and to understand where our students are coming from, where our teachers are coming from, and how we can make it so that we're creating a system that is built around empathy, so that that can really inform our decisions. So what does that look like? We hear a lot of, oh, schools are shut down. And I don't know about you, but schools are not shut down at all. They've just been shifted. So we're shifting the classroom from the in-person mode to the digital world. And some of our teachers that are on this in this conference maybe have some sort of hybrid between in-person and online learning. And that's fine too. But even though whichever mode of instruction you're in, we have to recognize the trauma surrounding a global pandemic. So it's up to us as educators to truly survey our students and our teachers. Survey your fellow teachers. How are they doing? Are they okay? I know for me, it's hard. And as the mother of a soon to be 1 month old, it's definitely been a struggle. And, being able to balance which Zoom call I'm in, how can I, serve the needs of my child in between? Are they okay? Is everyone else okay? I've got my partner that's working from home. So if you're struggling, then that means you're doing this right. And if you're not struggling, please tell me what you're doing. What's your secret? So it's really up to us as educators to recognize the trauma and, again, come from that place of empathy. We also want to connect with our administrators and our leaders to make sure we're facilitating the transition as much as possible. Now, the next thing I want to lead with is, are we grading and are we creating a classroom of compliance or comprehension? And I really, really hope that your answer is comprehension, because many of our systems that are in place happen to be systems of compliance. Are they there? Are they on time? Are they wearing shoes on their Zoom call? And there's so much, I've heard so many stories about teachers that have, or teachers and schools that are suspending students because they're eating and drinking while on a Zoom call. And really speaking, this isn't about the compliance of rules and regulations. It's really about facilitating learning at a distance. And so you want to ask yourself, all the norms that you have in place, is it facilitating learning? Is it facilitating comprehension? If it's facilitating compliance, you may want to rethink it, because remember, we want to establish a culture of empathy, and compliance and empathy don't necessarily get along very well. So ask yourself, are you also supporting your teachers, your fellow teachers? If you are an administrator, are you able to support the needs of your teachers and your staff? Your teachers may have children of their own at home that are learning. Are they healthy? Are they able to, access Do they have access to a laptop at all times? So these are things that you may want to ask your staff as well, or communicate these needs to your leaders and to your administrators. And of course, how are your students doing? This is where you want to monitor the status of your students. Do they have computer access? What's their home situation like? What's the wellness of your students? And, do your students have optimal conditions for learning? And if not, what can you do to provide that? And these are just the extra steps that we as educators have to take to really make sure that we're putting empathy at the forefront of our work. So what we're going to dive into is we're going to go into how we can create a culture of comprehension versus a culture of compliance. So it goes into this question of, does this even count? How can we shift from grading to self-monitoring and independence of student learning so that we're not assigning the learning to the students, that the students are assigning and being advocates of their own learning? That's what we want, right? We want to create these independent learners that are self-monitoring in a time where so much of it is resting on the independence of the student, right? So what does that look like? And if I'm going too fast, slow me down. I know maybe the coffee kicked in and I get really passionate. So I'd love to hear from our audience as well. So I want to talk about this idea of intrinsic learning. Learning because you want to and not because you have to. So before, we had to learn, right? We had to go to school, we had to come on time. And now we're in this world where, do we have to turn on our screens? Do I have to learn this material? And this is where you really want to create a situation where your students want to learn and they want to be there. And that's tough, right? I mean, this is something where we wanted to do that even in the in-person classroom, but now it's a necessity where we have to have this idea of intrinsic learning that's built in our work. So I wanted to dive into a little bit about what self-monitoring looks like for student learning, where you have these assessments that students can self-assess and really monitor their own progress throughout the lesson. Then you have maybe an assignment completion record where students can grade themselves and really check on themselves. But you're having this independence that's instilled in your students. And then you have this idea of reflections and metacognition, where your students are kind of going back and saying, how was that assignment? Was it difficult? Was it hard? Have you ever asked your students what they've thought about an assignment? I've had students tell me flat out, Ms. Bakshi, that was difficult, and also that was boring. I didn't want to do it. And the feedback can kind of, hurt you right here a little bit. But for me, I looked at it as sort of a teachable moment where I can say, okay, well, why was it boring? And what's something that I can do to add some, that intrinsic value, that interest to get students hooked? And how can I make it so that there's that buy-in from my students? Also, not just looking at their feelings associated with the assignment, you want to ask them, how did their thinking change over time? Because it's really powerful to see how students are able to look at their thinking and their learning over an entire spectrum of learning, right? So when you start from Monday and then you end up at Friday, how did their thinking change? And this also encourages our teachers to create an environment where mistakes and wrong answers are encouraged, essentially, where students feel comfortable having a wrong answer or having an incorrect sort of, you're not just looking for the right answer or the right way of thinking, but you have this way of sort of having all the answers and all the responses come about so that you can see how they can change over time. So another thing I want to quote is from Jennifer Gonzalez. She's the founder of Cult of Pedagogy. If you have not heard of Cult of Pedagogy, I highly recommend that you reach out to her podcast. And one of the things she talks about is moving beyond the packet and having this sort of idea where you're not just giving these busy work and busy worksheets as your assignment, but you're really looking at a power sheet and how you can have a graphic organizer or some sort of note-taking template that can support the learning versus, oh, let's look at this word search. So this is a time, especially during a pandemic and at a distance, where you want to really think about your assignments and ask yourself, are the students doing it because they have to just complete it and turn it in and get credit? Or again, is it something that's supporting their student learning and their own comprehension? So I love this graphic. It really helps me decide on whether I'm giving my student a power sheet or I'm just giving them sort of some busy work. And we don't want to do that because it's already hard as it is. So we don't want to just do something just to do it. So obviously there are some pitfalls, and we don't want to just rely on packets as busy work, right? And we don't want to give students just this blanket packet of work without a way for students to self-monitor. We want to be able to have them go through and monitor and self-pace their own learning. And do families have access to printers? We don't want to just have them blindly printing out materials that aren't going to support their learning. So we want something essentially where we can have a packet. If you are going to give a packet, are students able to monitor what was learned? Because with a big blanket packet, it's kind of difficult to do it all at the same time. The next thing I want to talk about is the power of voice and choice. We want to have the students be advocates of their own learning and have choices in their learning. So maybe we are giving students an opportunity to look at class discussions, group learning. Maybe we want to have them do a video versus a paper. So you're giving all these different ideas so that students are able to demonstrate their learning in a way that is their choice. So maybe they don't want to do a video, but maybe they want to do a written paper or vice versa. So you're able to have these choices available and give the students the autonomy to choose. And I'm sure we can see in the chat, when you have these different choices for your students, they feel empowered to say, okay, I do it this way, so this is how I'm going to demonstrate my learning to you. And their voice, their autonomous piece that's built into your instruction. So the next set is going to be dedicated to how we can diversify our instruction. And you're probably wondering, as you look at this slide, why does this crazy American have a giant assault rifle on here? And I'm going to talk about that, trust me. But these are the 4 types of ways that we want to make your online learning dynamic. So you've got classroom discussions, personalized learning plans, thought-provoking lessons, and interactive experiences. So we're going to dive into each of these and see what that looks like. All right, classroom discussions. Just because you're at a distance does not mean you have to sacrifice classroom discussions. In fact, already I've been speaking and I'm like, I've heard my voice a little too long. I really want to hear from our audience. So that's why we have the chat available as well. But with classroom discussions, just because you're at a distance doesn't mean you have to sacrifice that. So you can actually bring in family and family members into discussions as well. You can also have students schedule a phone call with a classmate, and that can be your think, pair, share. You can check for computer access, phone access, and all of that so that, you know, when you're assigning these discussions, you're not assigning it in a way that a student is not able to participate. And that's why it goes back to voice and choice. And then you want to ask, in terms of your class, what is a good time that works best for the majority of the class so that you can have a robust and solid classroom discussion. So this is a way that you can really diversify and make sure that there's accountability within your classroom discussion. So what does that look like? Maybe you're assigning students to create a video and you're looking at all the videos that they created. Or maybe you're having the students create a shared Google document and everyone has to participate on the Google document. You just want to have some accountability piece so that the students can have the discussion and you as the teacher are able to monitor the discussion. Next, personalized learning plans. So this is where, and I know, I'm sure we've heard the word asynchronous one too many times, but this is where you want to create learning plans for your students. So maybe there's an assignment list or there's something that really allows the student to take charge of their own learning and they're able to monitor their own pace. So maybe they're not able to join in for the synchronous all together time, but maybe there's a way that they can self-pace their own learning. Also, why don't we have students brainstorm their ideas that they might have some interest in learning about, and you can bring in those ideas into your learning plans. Perhaps students can self-select any readings or anything that they're interested in, and again, bring that into the learning. Finally, you can incorporate project-based learning where students feel like whatever they're learning is meaningful and is going to have, maybe it's a letter writing campaign, maybe it's some sort of advocacy work, youth action. We're looking at Greta right now leading the charge for environmental justice. So all of this can be part of the personalized learning plans that you and the student create together. All right, next, we've got thought-provoking lessons. So thinking about those thought-provoking lessons. In America, we're always talking about gun control and access to guns. And there's also, we had the travel bans earlier this year and last year. So what are these controversial issues that you can bring about as a teacher to the table? So there's this idea that education should not be political. And then there's another idea that education should absolutely be political. I say bring in these ideas and thoughts that can really bring about discussion and dialogue and interest that your students will eventually be able to vote on and have that citizen science piece that's built into your lessons. So according to Zaretta Hammond, she is a big proponent of culturally responsive teaching. And really the idea is not just bringing about, different cultures into your lessons. It's about supporting independent learning for agency. And we want our students to have a hunger for learning, a hunger for information. So maybe if you're talking about gun control or if you're talking about access to guns and whatnot, and this is just an example that I bring about, it's important to know our laws, our constitution, and what laws exist in other countries and how we can see how laws play about. So if you're a history teacher or if you're teaching civics or US history, for example, this is where you have that thought-provoking hook lesson where you get students to sort of think about, why should you care about the 3 branches of government? Oh, because you have this thought-provoking lesson that's here. And then I bring about interactive experiences also. Remember, what if we had to teach in a world without grades or without attendance? So it goes back to our idea of intrinsic learning, right? And learning because you want to and not because you have to. So you have these learning experiences that are driven by desire versus driven by compliance. So what if your class was optional? Would you be able to say, my students would come to my class anyway? To be honest, for me, I don't know. I know for me that I have professional learning where the teachers are assigned and they have to be there. So now it's up to me to make sure that our teachers want to be there. You all are in this free event. I hope that you're here because you want to be here and that this presentation is engaging enough where you want to be here and not because you have to be here. So this translates to us as teachers. How do we create spaces where our students want to be there and not because they have to be? So we want to design learning experiences that perhaps involve going outside. I mean, of course, if it's safe. If you're in California right now, it's probably not safe to go outside. But hopefully one day it will be. We can also build making into our lessons, maker education, gamification, playing games, and having. We want to consider engaging families to participate and guide the learning as well. Of course, we don't want to require that, but at least it's something to increase that family and community engagement as much as possible. So, metacognition is another important aspect to think about as you're looking at self reflection. And we talked about this already when we talked about monitoring student learning. So, we want to have students set their own learning goals. Where is their learning now in relation to how the lesson has progressed? Are students on track to meet their learning goals? What difficulties are the students having? It's really important for the students to come up with their own reflection instead of us as teachers telling the students what their difficulties are. So we want to really tap into our own students' strengths and seeing if they can see their strengths in their work. If not, where do they need to improve? And how can students be advocates for their own help? How can we get them to say, hey, miss, mister, whoever, I need more support here? So we're creating a set of students that are independent in their own learning and able to ask for help, and they have their own agency to do that. So now I ask you, as teachers, as curators of your own instruction, what is the why behind your instruction? How can you create a situation where your students are so excited to learn your material? So if you're going to learn, let's say you're a science teacher and you're teaching about homeostasis, for example. How do we get students to care about homeostasis? Well, maybe they're learning about a case where a student died from drinking too much water. Well, you have to know about regulation and homeostasis to understand why that student died. And so that would be an example of a case or a solution or some sort of problem. And all of this is the root cause of STEM instruction. This is how we're able to teach STEM and to make STEM for real for all. And that is, what is the why behind your instruction? So what can you teach so that it's like this puzzling event that causes wonderment, that causes a student to say, hey, tell me more. I want to learn more. Maybe there's a storytelling component that you can build into your instruction that really brings about a student's culture and a student's background. I know this was huge, especially when we learned about, I believe it was the student that created a windmill to power their own city. And you're able to see that in so many different scenarios and situations. And that's again where we connect our own STEM for real story, is that we want to amplify the stories of people of color in STEM. We've learned about Dr. Tyrone Hayes, a famous endocrinologist from UC Berkeley that took on the companies such as Syngenta and Monsanto, where they looked at these pesticides that were causing the frogs to the deformities in frogs. And so here's this African American scientist that's paving the way, yet do our young African American boys know his name? Because that's something that would be perfect for them to see him as a role model and say, wow, this is something where I see myself. And again, we're normalizing these stories in our work. More so, we can now think about this time to not just encourage family engagement, but make it a necessity. This is where we as teachers, we want to check the basic needs of our students. Do they have access to food? Do they have a safe space? Do they have the technology to do all of this work? We also want to make sure that even though we're guiding and we're prioritizing empathy, we don't want to go into vacation mode, right? We don't want to say, okay, we'll just wait until we're all at in-person instruction again. It's definitely possible, and we can truly become, agents of true solid instruction. We just have to use our resources, and we as teachers are the most versatile people to do that. And that's definitely something where I'm 100% confident that we're able to do. Look at us coming together right now. So this is a time to think about how we can get families to be involved in their students' lesson plans and learning plans. What's their daily schedule? What's the computer use schedule? We also want to make time and space for learning that, like get a table, get school supplies, get some sort of way to build a place that learning is encouraged and amplified. And then we don't want to lose out on our connections, right? That human connection. I know me for a fact, I'm definitely missing out on that human connection. I wish we were all in person right now, but hey, we're here at a distance. And so how can we encourage these moments of connection via video chat or via phone or something like that? And also, it's a great opportunity to connect with families so that you can find out how does their student learn best, and how does their student learn STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. How are we taking these topics or these subjects and creating these interdisciplinary lessons that really get students to think about the why behind their learning? And this is how you get to think about the why behind your instruction. So we have a mission, and that is to spark joy and have high quality professional learning that combines standards plus social justice. And that's all about us. If you're not having fun, I don't know, take a shot. Who knows? But no, we're not going to encourage bringing alcohol in our schools. But what we do want to provide is that humor and that idea that teachers want to be able to not just have compulsory professional learning, but we want to bring that aspect of joy. And we do this through our framework of recognizing, dismantling, and rebuilding. This is where we want to make sure that we are making STEM for real, for all, for every single student. So let's dive in as to what this actually looks like. How do we look at recognizing, dismantling, and rebuilding? Step one, we want to recognize, and this is where we encourage you as teachers to choose case study students that can really inform your teaching. And you can look at them with a closer fine-tooth comb and understand the story of your students. And so I would suggest choosing 1 to 2 case study students and really monitoring them throughout the year. Think about them in your lesson planning. Think about them in your unit planning, and understand their family and community background so that you can really think about their stories as you're teaching. Then reflect on your own identity and implicit bias. This is the time to think about any biases that you have that you bring into the classroom. And guess what? Newsflash, we all have biases. It's something that is inherently human within our framework. So now the next step is to recognize those biases. And the next thing you want to do is you want to consider the historical context in your education, or in your school, and how education was built. I know in the States here, we have property taxes that fund our schools. Well, there are some properties that have higher taxes than others. And that in itself is going to inherently create unequal funding in our schools. So being able to recognize that allows us to say, wow, well, then that means there's going to be unequal funding for STEM programs. Wow, that means there's going to be unequal access for one neighborhood versus another. So this is where we as educators have to recognize these issues, because that's when then we can start dismantling them. So diversifying your curriculum and instruction, making sure that students that your students are seeing diverse scientists in your instruction, in your curriculum. They're seeing diverse mathematicians. They're also seeing diverse ways of mathematical and scientific thinking. For example, when you look at something where is something alive, you have the clear-cut Western answer of no, let's say water. Water's not alive based on the Western standard. But then in so many cultures, especially indigenous cultures, water is sacred because we all know that water is a sign of life. So being able to have these discussions. And then you also want to stand up and have these courageous conversations as well as to what is inequitable and what is equitable. And finally, we can rebuild your spaces and connect with other people that are looking at social justice, that are looking at examples of quality, high quality STEM instruction that leads to social justice in that work. For example, looking at Henrietta Lacks and the what do you call how the ethics behind looking at cells. So I leave you with really thinking about these questions as to how you can make sure that you're building equity into your STEM instruction, especially at a distance. So looking at the digital divide, unpacking privilege, understanding what equitable instruction is. So with that said, remember that as we're building this community, I want you to think about how we want to be able to continue to network. So STEM for Real actually has a community that we're building out where we have a lesson bank of resources, monthly professional learning, office hours. So feel free if you're interested, sign up. We're always looking to support our teachers in additional professional learning. Again, that is joyful. Someone can laugh at our cheesy jokes. And but I leave you with this quote. And that is, when the system is dysfunctional, there's no one person that's right or wrong. Everyone is at a disadvantage. So think about that quote and how when you're looking at your system and where you teach, what parts are dysfunctional and what parts can you recognize, dismantle, and rebuild so that every single person has access to a quality STEM instruction. So this is some of the steps that we do in terms of our professional learning. We partner with administrators. We make sure that we're looking at our own implicit bias. We plan for instruction. We observe each other, whether it's online or at a distance through video. We analyze student work. We look at your case study students, and we plan, and all of those lessons that we create, we curate so that everyone has access to them. So I think we have a little bit of time for you to revisit your why. What is your why as an educator? What is your why in your current role right now? What inspires you? What brings you joy? And what do you want to get out of the Teachathon network and out of any network that you're part of, whether it's the STEM for Real network? But more so, I want to ensure that we are thinking about how we can weave equity into the forefront of our work. So the most valuable resource that all educators have is each other. Without collaboration, our growth is limited to our own perspectives, and that is truly what drives our work. So I want to thank you. Please follow us at STEM for Real. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. And I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. So feel free to join our email list. Shoot me an email to continue the conversation and really just sort of think about equity and how you are creating equitable spaces in STEM, and how are you making STEM for real for all in your context. So with that said, thank you so much, and I'm here for any sort of questions and comments.
Awesome. I took notes. There were several times that I really agreed, and I just if I could get you to talk a little more about it. I really believe in self-reflection and how that's where the learning happens. And that's one thing I noticed as an educator is that until the students start thinking about things, they don't really realize how they're learning stuff. It just happens. So how do you get your students, or how do you have them reflect? But like in what ways?
I think for me, it's about how would I want to reflect, and I think it's not just saying, because I know for me, I taught middle school and high school, so I can't just tell them to reflect. They're gonna, I don't know what they're gonna do. So really giving specific prompts, and so asking something like, what part of this assignment was difficult? What part of this assignment was fun? What did you, like really getting at those specific questions that I want them to ask. And also just saying, if you could change the assignment, what would you do differently?
Right. I love that. And also throughout, you kept talking about designing learning experiences. And when I was in college, they taught us, you have to learn how to teach. Well, you're really a designer. And I think that teachers now realize that they can start designing these experiences for their students. And that's just pretty exciting.
It's so true. We're always waiting for the next big curriculum or the next script that we're supposed to go by. And so many of the teachers I work with, I'm like, you know what? The people designing these curriculum, like, they're not in the classroom right now. You are. You know your students the best. So we need to be our own designers.
That's exactly right. And I love how you brought out the examples of real life role models of people of color, and how that it's not just historical figures that we can be proud of, but it's the biologists and the cell people, and the scientists and the mechanics and engineers. And that's what's really exciting. I like that.
Thank you.
Really
it's an honor to be here.
And it looks like we have some kudos and congratulations in the chat. No specific questions right here. We have a little bit of time. I don't know if you want to wait, or if there's something that you feel like you want to emphasize.
Yeah, I felt like I had so much to say in so little time, so I wanted to make sure I got through everything. But I'd also just love to hear. I know I saw something in the back, compliance or engagement. How do we tell the difference? And I think it goes back to checking in with our students. And I know for me as a math and science teacher, I was so committed to just, we got to teach the topic. We got to, focus on systems of equations. Let's go. And I was so focused on trying to get content in, when so much of our work is about relationships and knowing our students. And I think looking back, if I could tell my first year teacher self, it would really be spending that critical time on getting to know my students, their stories, where they're coming from, because so much of that I can weave back into the instruction.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your talking to us and sharing your heart and sharing STEM for real. And I hope that if anyone has any questions, they can look at the chat, and we also have links. We're going to have links to your video.
Awesome.
And
thank you again. Cheers, everyone, and happy Teachathon.
Hello, everyone. I bet you're wondering how I cloned myself. Well, I'm never going to tell you. That's how we put this whole thing on. John and I cloned ourselves. Okay, so I put the link for the next, for you to check out your next presentation. It's teachathonnetwork.com/P for presenter. And so please go there and check it out. And we are going to hop to the next. We have three sessions that are coming up next. And well, just look at the one that has the top of the hour. And that's where you're coming from. But I think I can grab this schedule real quick. There we go. Okay, so we have Dr. Sampson Arillo, Mr. Paul Langat, and Mrs. Grace Udo Ukajibu. I hope I didn't torture her name that bad. But anyway, all three of these sessions are going to be very good. Dr. Rio is strategies required in improving students' industrial training program between local businesses and technical colleges. So that's partnerships. That's what that says to me. So partnerships between industrial programs and technical colleges. And then Mr. Paul Langat is rethinking education policies. And the remaining one is virtual learning environment learning management system. Okay, so check out the link in the chat. That's where all the room links are. And you can always, remember, go to our YouTube channel and check out all the sessions that have been recorded, and we're going to keep recording them for you. So thank you so much, and talk to you later. Have a fun teach-a-thon.